Continuing with Chapter 10, or starting Chapter 10, of The Sword and the Stone. Wart wanted Kay to come with in his education, and so Merlin told them to be at a certain spot at a certain time, and that they would see something. And here we are with Chapter 10. Wart knew that if he told the elder boy about his conversation with Merlin, Kay would very properly refuse to be condescended to and not come. So he said nothing. It was strange, but their battle had made them friends again, and each could look the other in the eye with a kind of confused affection. They went together unanimously, though shyly, without any need of explanations, and found themselves standing at the end of Hobbs' barley strip after Mass, without the Wart having to use any ingenuity. When they were there, it was easy. "Come on," said the Wart. "Merlin told me to tell you that there was something along here that was specially for you." "What sort of thing?" asked Kay. "An adventure. How do we get to it?" "We ought to follow along the line which this strip makes, and I suppose that would take us into the forest. We should have to keep the sun just there on our left, but allow for its moving." "All right," said Kay. "What is the adventure?" "I don't know." They went along the strip, followed its imaginary line over the park and over the chase, keeping their eyes skinned all the time for some miraculous happening. They wondered whether half a dozen young pheasants they started had anything curious about them, and Kay was ready to swear that one of them was white. If it had been white, and if a black eagle had suddenly swooped down upon it from the sky, they would have known quite well that wonders were afoot, and that all they had to do was follow the pheasant or the eagle until they reached the maiden in the enchanted castle. However, the pheasant was not white, and no eagle appeared. At the edge of the forest, Kay said, "I suppose we shall have to go into this." "Merlin said to follow the line." "Well," said Kay, "I'm not afraid. If the adventure was specially for me, it's bound to be a jolly good one." They went in, and were surprised to find that the going was not bad at all. It was about the same as a big wood might be nowadays, whereas the common forest in those times was much more like a jungle on the Amazon. There were no pheasant-shooting proprietors then, to see that the undergrowth was thinned, and not 1,000th part of the number of the present-day timber merchants who prune away judiciously at the few remaining woods. The most of the forest sauvage was almost impenetrable, an enormous barrier of eternal trees, the dead ones fallen against the live, and held to them by ivy. The living, struggling in competition with each other toward the sun which gave them life, the floor boggy through lack of drainage or tindery from the old woods, so that you might suddenly tumble through a decayed tree trunk into an ant's nest, or laced with brambles and bindweed and honeysuckle and convolutus and teasels and stuff which country people call sweethearts, until you would be torn to pieces in 3 yards. This part was good. Hobbs' line pointed down what seemed to be a succession of glades, shady and murmuring places in which the wild thyme was droning with bees. The insect season was past its peak, for it was really the time for wasps on fruit, but there were many fritillaries still, with tortoise shells and red admirals on the flowering mint. Wart pulled a leaf of this and munched on it like chewing gum as they walked. "It's queer," he said, "but there have been people here. Look, there's a hoof mark. It was shod." "You don't see much," said Kay, "for there is a man." And sure enough, there was a man at the end of the next glade, sitting with a wood-axe by the side of a tree which he had felled. He was a queer-looking, tiny man with a hunchback and a face like mahogany, and he was dressed in numerous pieces of old leather which he had secured about his brawny arms and legs with pieces of cord. He was eating a hunk of bread and cheese with a knife, which years of sharpening had worn into a mere streak. Leaning his back against one of the highest trees that they had ever seen, the white flakes of wood lay all about him. The dressed stump of the felled tree looked very new. His eyes were bright, like a fox's. "I expect he will be the adventure," whispered Wart. "Pooh," said Kay, "you and your knights in armor, or dragons and things. You have knights in armor, or dragons, or things like that in an adventure. Not dirty old men cutting wood. Well, I'm going to ask him what happens along here anyway." They went up to the small munching woodman, who did not seem to have seen them, and asked them where the glades were leading to. They asked 2 or 3 times before they discovered that the poor fellow was either deaf or mad or both. He neither answered nor moved. "Oh, come on," said Kay. "He's probably loopy like what? And doesn't know what he is at. Let's go and leave the old fool." They went on for nearly a mile, and still the going was good. There were no paths exactly, and the glades were not continuous. Anybody who came there by chance would have thought that there was just one glade, which he was in, a couple of 100 yards long, unless he went to the end of it and discovered another one, screened by a few trees. Now and then they found a cut stump with the marks of an axe on it. But mostly, those had been carefully covered over with brambles or altogether grubbed up. The Wart considered that the glades must have been made. Kay caught the Wart by the arm at the edge of a clearing and pointed silently towards its further end. There was a grassy bank there, swelling up gently toward a gigantic sycamore, upwards of 90 feet high, which stood upon its top. On the bank there was an equally gigantic man lying at his ease, with a dog beside him. The man was as notable as the sycamore, for he stood or lay 7 feet without his shoes, and he was dressed in nothing but a kind of kilt made of Lincoln green worsted. He had a leather bracer on his left forearm. His enormous brown chest supported the dog's head. It had pricked its ears and was watching the boys, but made no other movement, which the muscles gently lifted as they rose and fell. The man appeared to be fast asleep. There was a 7-foot bow beside him, with some arrows more than a cloth-yard long. He, like the woodman, was the color of mahogany, and the curled hairs on his chest made a golden haze where the sun caught them. "He's it," whispered Kay excitedly. They went up to the man cautiously for fear of the dog, but the dog only followed them with its eyes, keeping its chin pressed firmly on the chest of its beloved master and giving them the least suspicion of a wag of its tail. It moved its tail without lifting it 2 inches in the grass. The man opened his eyes. Obviously he had not been asleep at all, and smiled at the boys, and jerked his thumb in the direction which pointed further up the glade. Then he stopped smiling and shut his eyes. "Excuse me," said Kay. "What happens up there?" The man made no answer, and kept his eyes closed, but he lifted his hand again and pointed onward with his thumb. "He means us to go on," said Kay. "It certainly is an adventure," said the Wart. "I wonder if the dumb woodsman could have climbed up the big tree he was leaning against and sent a message to this tree that we were coming. He certainly seems to have been expecting us." At this the naked giant opened one eye and looked at Wart in some surprise. Then he opened both eyes, laughed all over his big twinkling face, sat up, patted the dog, picked up his bow, and rose to his feet. "Very well then, young meesters," he said, still laughing. "Us will come along with thee, arter all. Young heads still make the sharpest, they do say." Kay looked at him in blank surprise. "Who are you?" he asked. "Naylor," said the giant. "John Naylor in the wide world it were, till us come to be a man of the hood. Then 'twere John Little for some time in the hood like, but mostly folks put it backwards now and calls us Little John." "Oh," cried the Wart in delight, "I've heard of you often when they tell stories in the evening of you and Robin Hood." "Not Hood," said Little John reprovingly. "That bain't the way to name un, meester, not in the hood." "But it's Robin Hood in the stories," said Kay. "Oh, the book-learned chaps, they don't know all. Howsomever, 'tis time to be stepping along." They fell on either side of the enormous happy man, and had to run 1 step in 3 to keep up with him, for although he talked very slowly, he walked on his bare feet very fast. The dog trotted at heel. "Please," asked the Wart, "where are you taking us?" "Why, to Robin Hood, seemingly. Aren't you sharp enough to guess that, Mr. Hart?" The giant gave a sly peep out of the corner of his eye at this, for he knew quite well that he had set the boys 2 problems at once. First, what was Robin's real name? And second, how did he come to know the Warts? The Wart fixed on the second question first. "How did you know my name?" "Oh," said Little John, "us knowed." "Does Robin Hood know we are coming?" "Nay, my duck, A young scholar like thee should speak his name scholarly. Well, what is his name? Cried the wart, between exasperation and being out of breath from running to keep up. You said Hood. So it is Hood, my duck. Robin Hood, like the hoods you am running through. And a grand fine name it is. Robin Wood! Aye, Robin Hood. What else should un be, seeing as he loves 'em? They am free pleases. The hoods, the fine pleases. Let thee sleep in 'em, come summer, come winter, withouten brick nor thatch, and hunting 'em for thy commons lest thee starve, and smell to 'em with the good earth in the springtime, and numbers of 'em. They brings forward their comely bright leaves according to order, or loses 'em by the same order backward. Let thee stand in 'em, that thou best be seen, and move in 'em, that thou best not be heard, and warm thee with 'em. Aye, the golden light of their timbers, as thou fall'st on sleep, aye, they am proper fine places. The hoods, for a free man of hands and heart, Kay said, but I thought all Robin Hood's men wore horse and jerkins of Lincoln Green. That us do, replied Little John, in the winter like, but when us needs 'em with leather leggins and hood hawk. But here, in summer, 'tis more seasonable thus for pickets, who have not to do save watch. Were you a sentry then? Aye, and so were Wold Mulch, as you spoke to by the felled tree. And I think, exclaimed Kay triumphantly, that this next big tree which we are coming to will be the stronghold of Robin Wood. They were indeed approaching the monarch of the forest. It was a lime tree, as great as that which used to grow in the Moor Park in Herefordshire, no less than 100 feet in height and 17 feet in girth. A yard above the ground, its smooth beech-like trunk was embellished with a sort of beard of little twigs at the bottom, where each of the great branches had sprung from the trunk. The bark had split and was now discolored with rain, water, or sap. The bees zoomed along its bright and sticky leaves, higher and higher toward heaven, and a rope ladder disappeared among the foliage. Nobody could have climbed the tree without a ladder, even with irons. You think well, Meester Kay, said Little John, and there be Meester Robin, a dallion atween her roots. The boys, who had been more interested in the lookout man perched in a crow's nest at the very top of that swaying and whispering glory of the earth, lowered their eyes at once and clapped them upon Robin Wood. He was not, as they had expected, a romantic man, or not at first, nearly as tall as Little John. These two, of course, were the only people in the world who had ever shot an arrow the distance of a mile with the English longbow, or at any rate more than 6 feet high. He was a sinewy fellow, whose body did not carry an ounce of fat. He was not half naked like John, but clad discreetly in faded green with a silvery bulge at his side. He was clean-shaven, sunburned, nervous, gnarled like the roots of the trees which he loved, but gnarled and mature with weather and with poetry rather than with age, for he was about 30 years old. Eventually he lived to be 87 and attributed his long life to smelling the turpentine in the pines. At the moment he was lying flat on his back and looking upward, but not into the sky. And we'll pause there.